Sometimes a father's love comes disguised as what looks like his biggest failure. Ray Halpern had spent years feeling like he'd disappointed everyone who mattered to him when his estranged father died and left him a junkyard full of rusted rockets. In the Nevada desert, Ray's family called it worthless junk. His wife begged him not to waste their last savings moving there. His son thought it was another one of Dad's foolish dreams. But Ray's father wasn't just any recluse. He was Dr. Edmund Halpern, a Cold War aerospace engineer who had vanished from government work with dangerous secrets. Hidden inside those broken rockets were coded blueprints, forgotten patents, and journals revealing a classified contract worth $140 million. Ray wasn't inheriting scrap metal. He was inheriting the chance to prove he was more than the failure everyone thought he was. But would his family realize what they had before they lost everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ray Halpern's hands were stained with motor oil and disappointment. At 53, he owned a failing auto repair shop in suburban Phoenix, where the air conditioning barely worked and the coffee maker had given up entirely 3 months ago. The morning sun filtered through grimy windows, casting long shadows across the scattered wrenches and overdue bills that seemed to multiply on his desk like weeds. "Dad," the bank called again. Jake stood in the doorway, 25 years old, and wearing the expression of someone who'd watched his father struggle for too long. His son had inherited Sarah's practical nature and Ray's stubborn streak, a combination that made their conversations feel like negotiations between warring countries. Ray wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "I'll handle it." "When?" "You've been saying that for 6 months." Jake's voice carried the weight of adult responsibility thrust upon him too early. He worked part-time at the shop while finishing his business degree, watching his father's dreams crumble in real time. "Mom's working double shifts at the hospital just to keep us afloat." The mention of Sarah made Ray's chest tighten. His wife, of 28 years, had married a man with ambition and fire in his belly. She'd gotten someone who fixed other people's cars while his own dreams rusted in the garage. Sarah had supported every venture: the failed restaurant, the botched real estate investment, the brief attempt at day trading that had cost them Jake's college fund. Each failure had carved a deeper line in her face and added another layer of resignation to her voice. "Your grandfather's funeral is tomorrow," Ray said, changing the subject because he couldn't bear to see that look in Jake's eyes, the same look Sarah got when she thought he wasn't watching. "Are we going?" Jake asked. "I mean, you haven't spoken to him in what, 15 years? Longer, Ray thought. Dr. Edmund Halpern had been absent from Ray's life long before their final argument. Even when he was physically present during Ray's childhood, his mind had always been elsewhere, lost in equations and blueprints and government projects that were too important to interrupt for little league games or school plays. He was still. "My father," Ray said, though the words felt hollow. The truth was more complicated. Edmund Halpern had been a giant in Ray's young imagination. A real-life rocket scientist who worked for NASA and talked to astronauts and understood the mysteries of space. Ray had worshipped him from a distance, collecting newspaper clippings about the space program and imagining his father's hand in every successful launch. But heroes, Ray had learned, make terrible fathers. The workshop bell chimed as Sarah pushed through the door, still wearing her nursing scrubs from the overnight shift. At 51, she remained beautiful in the way of women who'd learned to find strength in adversity. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes, the same ones that had made Ray forget every sensible thought 30 years ago, looked tired. "The lawyer called," she said without preamble. "Your father's will is being read this afternoon." Ray felt something twist in his stomach. "I didn't think he'd leave anything worth discussing." Sarah pulled a folded paper from her purse, a faded NASA identification badge she'd found among Edmund's effects. The photo showed a younger version of Ray's father, clean-shaven and confident, wearing a crisp white shirt and narrow tie. "Dr. Edmund Halpern, senior aerospace engineer," it read. Security clearance level 7. He was somebody once, she said softly, before he became the hermit in the desert. Jake took the badge, studying the photograph with curiosity. He looks like you, Dad. Same eyes. Ray had spent decades trying not to see the resemblance. His father's abandonment, first emotional, then physical, had shaped Ray's determination to be present for his own family. Yet here he was, 53, and failing at the same fundamental task of providing security and stability. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and disappointment. Harold Brennan had been Edmund's attorney for 25 years, a thin man, with wire-rimmed glasses, who spoke in the measured cadence of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. "The estate is relatively straightforward," Brennan began, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. "Your father owned a property in Nevada, 47 acres outside Tonopah, purchased in 1987. What's on it?" Sarah asked. Brennan consulted his notes. According to the property records, it was formerly used as a rocket testing facility. Small scale, privately owned. Your father lived there for the past 23 years. Ray felt the room tilt slightly. "Rockets? The structures are still standing, though I understand they're in various states of disrepair. The property includes a main hangar, several launch platforms, and what appears to be a workshop facility." Brennan handed Ray a manila envelope. "He left this for you specifically." Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in his father's. "Careful script, Ray. I know I was never the father you deserved. Maybe this will help you understand why. The answers are in the workshop. Look for the constellation Cassiopeia. Everything you need is there, but be careful who you trust. The work must continue, but only in the right hands. Dad below." The message was a rough sketch of a key with unusual notches. "That's it?" Jake asked. "No explanation? No apology?" Sarah studied the letter over Ray's shoulder. What did he mean? "About Cassiopeia. It was his favorite constellation," Ray said quietly. "He used to point it out when I was little, said it looked like a woman sitting in a chair, waiting for someone to come home." The memory hit him unexpectedly. One of the few times his father had taken him outside at night, away from the equations and blueprints. Edmund had pointed to the W-shaped cluster of stars and told Ray the Greek myth of the vain queen who was punished for her boastfulness. "Sometimes," his father had said, "the most important things are hiding in plain sight." Brennan cleared his throat. "There's also this." He handed Ray a set of keys and a deed. "The property is yours, free and clear. No mortgages or liens." Sarah frowned. "How is that possible? 23 years in the desert, no visible income." "Your father was quite frugal," Brennan interrupted. "He lived simply and kept his affairs in order." Driving home, the Nevada deed felt heavy in Ray's hands. Sarah stared out the passenger window while Jake sat in the back seat, scrolling through real estate websites on his phone. "The land's worth maybe 30,000, Jake announced. "Remote location, no utilities, weird buildings. We could sell it, pay down some debt. Or," Sarah said carefully, "we could see what he meant in that letter." Ray glanced at her, surprised. "You want to go to Nevada?" "I want to understand why a man abandons his family to live alone with a bunch of rockets." Her voice carried a note of something Ray couldn't identify. Hope, maybe, or desperate curiosity. Maybe there's something there worth saving. That evening, Ray sat in his garage among the familiar tools and half-finished projects that defined his life. The NASA badge lay on his workbench next to his father's letter. Dr. Edmund Halpern looked young and confident in the photo, a man who'd believed he could touch the stars. Ray had spent his adult life running from that legacy, determined to be practical and present in ways his father never was. But practicality hadn't saved his business or his marriage. Presence hadn't protected his family from financial ruin. Sarah found him there past midnight, holding the letter up to the light as if it might reveal hidden messages. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking about all the times I swore I'd be different than him," Ray said. "Better father, better husband, more reliable." "You are a better father," Sarah said firmly. "Jake knows you love him. But I'm still failing him. Failing you." Sarah sat on the workbench beside him, her scrubs rustling in the quiet garage. "Maybe your father wasn't running away from something. Maybe he was running toward it." Ray looked at her, really looked, and saw something he hadn't noticed in months. A spark of the adventurous woman who'd married him despite her parents' objections, who'd supported his dreams even when they led nowhere. "You think we should go?" he said. "I think we should find out what a rocket scientist leaves behind when he disappears into the desert for 23 years. She took his stained hands in hers. "And I think you need to know who your father really was before you can figure out who you're supposed to be." The next morning, Ray called Brennan's office and asked for directions to the property. The lawyer seemed surprised, but pleased. "One more thing," Brennan said. "Your father paid the property taxes through 2027. He also maintained a small account for maintenance and utilities." "Very thorough man, your father." As Ray hung up the phone, Jake appeared with a duffel bag and a determined expression. "If you're going on some crazy treasure hunt in the desert," his son said, "I'm coming with you." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile Ray had seen from her in months. "Road trip to see Grandpa's rockets. This should be interesting." Ray felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. Maybe his father's final gift wasn't property or mysterious letters. Maybe it was the chance for Ray to stop running from the legacy he'd inherited and start running toward the man he was meant to become. The desert waited, full of secrets and rusted dreams, and for the first time in decades, Ray Halpern was ready to find out what his father had been protecting all those years. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Phoenix streets as they loaded the truck, and Ray couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover something that would change everything he thought he knew about failure, family, and the thin line between abandonment and sacrifice. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a moonscape of sagebrush and ancient mountains that made Ray feel like he'd driven off the edge of the world. After 6 hours on increasingly remote highways, they'd turned onto a dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere until the rockets appeared on the horizon like metal monuments to forgotten dreams. "Jesus," Jake whispered from the back seat. 3 massive rocket shells stood upright against the cloudless sky, their white paint faded and peeling, but still impressive in their skeletal grandeur. Smaller rockets dotted the landscape around them, some horizontal on transport cradles, others partially, buried in sand that had shifted with decades of wind. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, though sections had collapsed and the gate hung open on rusted hinges. Sarah pressed her face to the window. How did he afford all this? Ray guided the truck through the gate, following a cracked concrete, rode toward the largest structure, a hangar that could have housed a small aircraft. The building showed its age, but remained structurally sound, its corrugated metal walls bearing the ghostly outlines of painted letters that time had nearly erased. They parked beside the hangar and stepped into the desert silence. The only sounds were wind through metal and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Ray pulled out his father's letter and studied the crude drawing of the key, then looked around for anything resembling the constellation Cassiopeia. "There," Jake pointed to a smaller building behind the hangar. "Look at those antenna arrays." 5 metal structures rose from the building's roof, arranged in the distinctive W shape of Cassiopeia. Ray felt his pulse quicken as they approached. The structure, which appeared to be some kind of workshop or laboratory. The door was secured with a complex lock that perfectly matched the key drawing in his father's letter. Ray searched the area methodically until he found it, a hollow space beneath a loose foundation stone where a wrapped oilcloth protected a uniquely notched key. The workshop door opened with surprising ease, revealing a space that took Ray's breath away. Unlike the weathered exterior, the interior was pristine and organized with military precision. Workbenches lined the walls, equipped with tools and instruments that belonged in a NASA facility rather than a desert hideaway. Charts and blueprints covered every available wall space, showing rocket designs, propulsion systems, and mathematical equations that made Ray's head spin. But it was the centerpiece that stopped them all in their tracks. A sleek rocket component, perhaps 8 feet tall and gleaming silver, mounted on a test stand in the middle of the room. It looked like it had been built yesterday, every surface polished and maintained with obsessive care. "Dad," Jake's voice was barely a whisper, "this isn't junk." Sarah moved toward a wall covered with photographs, images of Edmund in NASA facilities, shaking hands with men in expensive suits, standing beside rockets that Ray recognized from history books. But there were other photos too, more recent ones showing Edmund working alone in this very laboratory, his hair white, but his expression intense with purpose. Ray found himself drawn to a desk where a thick folder lay open, as if his father had been working on it recently. The cover bore official government seals and the words "Project Icarus" classified in bold red letters. Inside were technical drawings that hurt to look at, propulsion systems beyond anything Ray had ever imagined, fuel mixture formulas, and pages of handwritten notes in his father's careful script. At the back of the folder, torn and deliberately incomplete, was a blueprint fragment showing what appeared to be a revolutionary engine design. Critical sections had been removed, leaving only tantalizing hints of the complete system, written across the top in his father's hand, "For Ray, when you understand the responsibility." "Look at this," Sarah called from across the room. She stood before a large safe, its door slightly ajar. Inside were more documents, bundles of papers that looked official and important, and something that made Ray's knees weak, stacks of what appeared to be government bonds. Jake picked up one of the documents with shaking hands. "Dad, this is a federal contract, dated 1987. It's for—" He stopped, reading carefully. $47 million for advanced propulsion research. "That's impossible," Ray said. But even as he spoke, he was finding more evidence. Banking documents, investment records, and a notebook where his father had meticulously tracked various financial instruments over 2 decades. The numbers were staggering. Conservative investments that had grown steadily, cryptocurrency purchases, made years before anyone knew what Bitcoin was, and royalty payments from patents Ray had never heard of. Sarah's voice was steady but strained. "Ray, there's more than money here, look." She was holding a letter addressed to him, dated just 3 months ago, his father's final message written in the shaky hand of someone who knew his time was running short. "My dear son, if you're reading this, then you found the workshop and you're beginning to understand. I wasn't a hermit hiding from life. I was a guardian, protecting something too dangerous to release and too important to destroy. Project Icarus was meant to be my greatest achievement. A propulsion system that could have revolutionized space, travel, made Mars missions routine, opened the solar system to human exploration. But the same technology could level cities, could be weaponized in ways that would have made the atomic bomb seem like a firecracker. I made a choice 23 years ago. I took the technology and disappeared rather than hand it over to people who would have used it for destruction. The government believed I suffered a nervous breakdown and destroyed my research. I let them believe it. Everything here, the money, the patents, the research, it's all legally yours now. But with it comes the same terrible choice I faced. The complete plans are hidden where only you can find them, but accessing them means accepting responsibility for how they're used. I know. I was a poor father. I chose the world's safety over your childhood, humanity's future over your baseball games. I can't undo that failure, but I can give you the chance to succeed where I failed, to find a way to use this gift for good, to bring families together, rather than tear them apart. The key to everything is in your memories, in the stories I told you about the stars. You have more of my mind than you know, and more of your mother's heart than I ever possessed. Trust that combination. I love you, son. I always have. Your father. Ray's hands trembled as he finished reading. The workshop suddenly felt smaller, crowded with the weight of revelation and impossible choices. His father hadn't abandoned his family. He'd sacrificed his relationship with them to protect the world from his own brilliance. "What do we do now?" Jake asked quietly. Before Ray could answer, his phone rang. Sarah's voice, tight with worry. "Ray, you need to get home. The bank called. They're foreclosing next week." The real world crashed back into focus, bills and responsibilities, and the auto shop that was bleeding money while they stood in a desert laboratory worth more than Ray had ever imagined. But his father's warning echoed in his mind. "Be careful who you trust. We can't just take this and run," Ray said finally. "Dad spent 23 years protecting something. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we make any decisions." Sarah nodded, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. The promise of financial security warring with the burden of secrets and moral responsibility. As they prepared to leave the workshop, Ray noticed something else. Security cameras still active, their red recording lights blinking steadily. His father had been watching everything, even from beyond the grave. The drive back to the motel in Tonopah was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Ray knew their lives had just changed irrevocably, but he couldn't yet grasp whether it was salvation or catastrophe. That night, lying in a cheap motel bed while Sarah slept fitfully beside him, Ray stared at the blueprint fragment and wondered if his father had been a hero or a coward, and which one Ray himself was destined to become. The coded fragment lay on the nightstand like a roadmap to impossible choices, and for the first time in his life, Ray Halpern understood that some inheritances come with a price that money can't measure. Ray returned to the facility alone the next morning, leaving Sarah and Jake at the motel with promises to be careful and explanations that satisfied no one, least of all himself. The desert dawn painted the rockets in shades of gold and rust, making them look less like abandoned dreams and more like sleeping giants waiting for someone brave enough to wake them. He'd spent the night studying the blueprint fragment by lamplight, trying to make sense of the technical drawings and mathematical notations that seemed to dance at the edge of his comprehension. His mechanical experience helped with some concepts, fuel flow rates, combustion chamber pressures, but the advanced propulsion theory was like reading a foreign language written by someone smarter than he'd ever imagined his father to be. Workshop felt different in solitude, more personal somehow. Ray moved through the space methodically, examining everything with the careful attention of a man who'd spent his life understanding how things worked. The rocket component in the center appeared to be some kind of engine prototype, its surface covered with sensors and diagnostic equipment that suggested it had been tested repeatedly. He was photographing technical diagrams when he heard movement. Outside, footsteps on gravel, too heavy and deliberate to be desert wildlife. Ray moved to the window and saw a young woman examining one of the smaller rockets with the focused intensity of someone who knew what she was looking at. She appeared to be 17 or 18, Hispanic, wearing faded jeans and a NASA t-shirt. That had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried a tablet computer and what looked like a radiation detector. Most surprisingly, she moved around the facility with the casual familiarity of someone who'd been there before. Ray stepped outside, and the girl froze like a deer caught in headlights. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, backing toward the fence. "I didn't know anyone would be here. I can leave." "Wait," Ray called. "It's okay. I'm Ray Halpern. This was my father's place." The girl's expression shifted from fear to curiosity. "Doctor, Halpern was your father. I'm Luna Martinez. I've been coming here for 2 years. 2 years. Why?" Luna glanced at the rockets, then back at Ray with obvious internal debate. "For my research project. Dr. Halpern said I could use the facilities. For my calculations, as long as I didn't touch anything important." "You knew my father?" "Not well. He was usually working when I came by. but he let me measure the rockets and helped me understand some of the engineering principles. She held up her tablet. I'm working on my college applications. Aerospace. Engineering at Caltech. Your dad said these rockets represented some of the most advanced propulsion research ever attempted. Ray studied her more carefully. Despite her youth, Luna spoke about rocket science with the confidence of someone who understood complex systems. Her tablet displayed what appeared to be her own calculations and design sketches. "What do you know about propulsion systems?" he asked. "More than most people my age, probably. My uncle works at Nellis Air Force Base, and I've been obsessed with space travel since I was 8. Luna hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Dr. Halpern was brilliant, Mr. Halpern. Whatever he was working on here, it was revolutionary. Something in her tone made Ray pay attention. "What do you mean?" "The fuel residue samples I've analyzed, the thrust calculations based on the engine configurations, none of it matches conventional rocket technology. The efficiency ratios are impossible unless—" She stopped herself. Unless what? Luna looked at him with the earnest intensity of youth wrestling with adult concepts. Unless he'd solved the fundamental problems that have limited rocket propulsion for decades. The energy density requirements, the fuel weight ratios, the thermal management issues. Your father's work suggests he'd found solutions that most scientists who think are still decades away. Ray felt something click into place. His father hadn't just been hiding dangerous technology. He'd been sitting on breakthroughs that could have advanced human space exploration by generations. "Would you be willing to help me understand some of his research?" Ray asked. "I'm a mechanic, not a rocket scientist." Luna's eyes lit up with the fire of someone offered a chance to explore genuine mysteries. "Are you serious? You'd let me see his actual research?" Ray made a decision that felt both reckless and inevitable. "There's something I need to show you." In the workshop, Luna's reaction to the classified documents was everything Ray had hoped for. She moved through the technical drawings like a scholar discovering lost manuscripts, her young mind absorbing and processing information with a speed that left Ray feeling intellectually ancient. "This is incredible," she whispered, studying the blueprint fragment. "This isn't just advanced propulsion, it's a completely new approach to generating thrust. Instead of chemical reactions, he was using—" She paused, reading more carefully. "I need more information to understand the complete system. The rest is hidden somewhere," Ray said. "He wrote that the key is in my memories." Luna examined the blueprint fragment with the systematic attention of someone trained in scientific analysis. After several minutes, she looked up with excitement. "Mr. Halpern, there's something here. Look at these markings along the edge." Ray followed her finger to tiny notations he'd dismissed as manufacturing marks. But Luna was right. They formed a pattern, almost like a code. "It's not random," she said. "These symbols repeat in specific sequences. Your father was leaving clues." As they worked together to document and analyze the fragments, Ray found himself impressed by Luna's combination of technical knowledge and analytical thinking. She approached problems with the methodical patience of a natural scientist. But her enthusiasm reminded him of his own excitement when he'd first learned to rebuild engines. "Can I ask you something?" Luna said during a break. "Why did Dr. Halpern live out here alone? He could have been teaching at universities, working for NASA again." Ray considered how much to reveal. He thought his work was too dangerous to trust to other people. Luna nodded as if this made perfect sense. Like Einstein with the atomic bomb, sometimes scientists have to choose between advancing knowledge and protecting humanity. Her casual reference to one of history's greatest moral dilemmas reminded Ray that he was dealing with someone far more sophisticated than her age suggested. Luna understood that scientific knowledge carried ethical weight, that some discoveries came with terrible responsibilities. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Bank called again. They want to meet tomorrow. We're running out of time." The real world intruded like a slap, reminding Ray that while he was playing with rockets and revolutionary technologies, his family was facing financial ruin. The contrast felt surreal, surrounded by millions of dollars in government bonds and priceless research, while his wife worked double shifts to pay for groceries. "I have to go," he told Luna, "but would you be willing to keep working on this? I think my father would have wanted someone like you to understand his research." Luna's smile was radiant with purpose. "Mr. Halpern, I've been dreaming of space, travel my whole life. If your father's work can help humanity reach the stars safely, I want to be part of it." As Ray drove back toward town, he carried with him a sense of possibilities he hadn't felt in years. Luna's passion reminded him of why people became engineers and scientists, not for money or recognition, but for the chance to push human knowledge into new frontiers. But beneath the excitement was a growing awareness that every discovery brought new complications. His father's legacy wasn't just money and technology, it was the burden of choosing how that technology would be used. The motel room felt cramped after the vast spaces of the desert facility. Sarah sat at the small table, surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, while Jake paced restlessly between the window and the door. Ray's return brought temporary relief to the tension, but he could see in Sarah's eyes that their situation had grown more desperate during his absence. "The bank won't extend the deadline," she said without preamble. "We have 48 hours to bring the loan current, or they foreclose on the shop." Ray sank into the room's single chair, feeling the weight of impossible choices. "How much?" $37,000. Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but he could hear the strain beneath her professional nurse's composure. "Plus penalties and fees." Jake stopped pacing. "Dad, those bonds in the workshop, couldn't we use some of them?" "It's not that simple," Ray said, though he wasn't entirely sure why it wasn't. The government bonds were legally his, according to the will and the attorney. But his father's warnings about trust and responsibility echoed in his mind like a persistent alarm. Sarah leaned forward. "Ray, I've been thinking about your father's letter. He said the money was legally yours. We could solve our immediate problems and still have resources left to figure out the bigger picture." Before Ray could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Halpern, this is Marcus Webb. I run the scrapyard in Tonopah. I heard you inherited your father's place." Ray put the phone on speaker. "What can I do for you, Mr. Webb? It's more what I can do for you. Your father and I had an understanding. I kept an eye on his property when he was away, made sure nobody bothered his equipment. But there's something you should know. Federal agents have been asking questions around town about your father, about the facility." Ray felt his blood chill. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest they're interested in what he left behind. I'd be careful who you talk to, and I'd be real careful about what you might be planning to do with that property." After Marcus hung up, the room fell silent except for the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit. Jake was the first to speak. "Government agents." "Dad, what exactly was Grandpa involved in?" Ray found himself telling them about Luna, about the advanced propulsion technology, about the blueprint fragments that suggested revolutionary breakthroughs in rocket science. As he spoke, he watched Sarah's expression shift from concern to fascination to worry. "So this technology," she said carefully, "it could be used for space exploration or weapons," Ray finished. "That's why he disappeared. He chose to protect it rather than let it be weaponized." Jake sat heavily on the bed. "And now it's our responsibility, our opportunity," Sarah corrected quietly. "Your father protected this technology for 23 years. Maybe it's time for it to be used for the right purposes." Ray studied his wife, seeing something in her expression he'd almost forgotten, the spark of adventure that had first attracted him, the willingness to take calculated risks for important goals. Sarah had always been practical, but she'd also been brave. The next morning, Ray returned to the facility with a different purpose. Instead of exploring randomly, he began a systematic documentation of everything his father had left behind. Luna arrived shortly after sunrise. carrying a backpack full of scientific equipment and a notebook thick with calculations. "I've been thinking about the code in the blueprint fragments," she said immediately. "I think I know what your father was trying to tell you." She led Ray to a section of the workshop he'd barely examined, a wall covered with astronomical charts and photographs of the night sky. Prominently displayed was a detailed map of the constellation Cassiopeia, with various stars marked and numbered. "Look at this," Luna said, pointing to notations beside specific stars. "These numbers correspond to the code sequences in the blueprint fragments. Your father was using stellar coordinates as an encryption key." Ray felt pieces clicking together. In his mind, he said the key was in my memories, in the stories he told me about the stars. What stories? Ray closed his eyes, reaching back through decades of complicated feelings to the few good memories of his father. He used to say that Cassiopeia was a queen who was punished for her vanity, but that the stars remembered her beauty, that sometimes the most important things are hiding in plain sight. Luna's excitement was infectious as she cross-referenced stellar coordinates with the blueprint notations. After an hour of calculations, she looked up with triumph. "Mr. Halpern, I think I know where the rest of the plans are hidden." She led him to the main hangar, where the largest rocket stood like a silver monument. Using her tablet to calculate angles based on the stellar coordinates, Luna guided Ray to a specific section of the rocket's base. Hidden behind what appeared to be a structural panel was a sophisticated lock, not mechanical but electronic, requiring a specific numerical sequence. "The coordinates," Luna said breathlessly. "Try inputting the stellar coordinates for Cassiopeia." Ray's hands shook slightly as he entered the numbers. The lock disengaged with a soft click, revealing a chamber inside the rocket's base. Within was a sealed container holding what appeared to be the complete technical documentation for his father's propulsion system. Hundreds of pages of blueprints, test results, and theoretical projections. But there was also something else. A prototype component, unlike anything Ray had seen. It was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a coffee can, but it hummed with subtle energy and seemed to bend light around its edges in ways that hurt to look at directly. "Jesus," Luna whispered. "Is that—" "The actual propulsion unit," Ray said, reading from the accompanying documentation. "A working prototype of the complete system." The implications hit them both simultaneously. This wasn't just theoretical research. It was a functional device capable of generating the revolutionary propulsion his father had developed. In the right hands, it could revolutionize space travel. In the wrong hands, it could level cities. Luna's voice was barely audible. "Mr. Halpern, what are we going to do?" Before Ray could answer, they heard vehicles approaching outside. Multiple engines, heavy treads that suggested official rather than civilian transportation. Through the hangar windows, they could see black SUVs forming a perimeter around the facility. Ray quickly sealed the container and its precious contents back into the rocket's base, but he knew it was too late. The government agents Marcus had warned about had found them, and the easy choices, if there had ever been any, were now gone forever. "Stay calm," he told Luna, though his own heart was racing. "Let me do the talking." As federal agents surrounded the hangar, Ray realized that his father's 23 years of solitude were over. The secret Dr. Edmund Halpern had died protecting was about to become the responsibility of a failed auto mechanic, a teenage genius, and a family desperately trying to survive in a world that had suddenly become far more complicated than any of them had ever imagined. Agent Patricia Coleman was not what Ray had expected from a federal investigator. Mid-40s, professionally dressed, but not intimidating, she spoke with the measured courtesy of someone accustomed to dealing with civilians who'd stumbled into matters beyond their comprehension. Her team remained outside while she entered the hangar alone, a gesture Ray interpreted as either confidence or calculated psychological strategy. "Mr. Halpern, I'm Agent Coleman," with the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Security. We understand. You've inherited your father's research facility. Ray kept his voice steady. I've inherited some property, yes. What can I do for you? Coleman's smile was polite but firm. Your father was involved in classified research before his retirement. We need to ensure that any materials he left behind are properly secured. Retired? Luna spoke up before Ray could stop her. Dr. Halpern didn't retire. He disappeared because... Ray shot her a warning look, but Coleman's attention was already focused on the teenager with sharp interest. And you are? Luna Martinez. I'm studying aerospace engineering. How fascinating, Coleman said in a tone that suggested it wasn't fascinating at all. Mr. Halpern, we'll need to conduct a complete inventory of the facility. For national security purposes, you understand. Ray felt the personal journal entry from his father burning in his jacket pocket, the handwritten confession he'd found that morning, explaining exactly why Edmund Halpern had chosen exile over collaboration. His father's words echoed in his mind. They wanted me to perfect the destruction potential. When I refused to weaponize my life's work, they made it clear that patriotism and cooperation were not optional concepts. I'd like to see a warrant, Ray said quietly. Coleman's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. Mr. Halpern, I'm hoping we can handle this cooperatively. Your father signed agreements that transferred ownership of certain research to the government upon his death. Then you should have no problem producing the legal documentation. For the first time, Coleman looked slightly less confident. The paperwork is being processed. In the meantime, we'd appreciate your voluntary cooperation, and if I don't volunteer, then we'll obtain the necessary court orders and return with a full team, which would be much more disruptive to your family, I imagine. The threat was delivered with professional politeness, but it was unmistakably a threat. Ray thought about Sarah's ultimatum waiting back at the motel, about Jake's college fund that had never recovered from Ray's previous failed ventures, about the auto shop that would be foreclosed in 24 hours. I need time to consider this, Ray said. Coleman nodded as if she'd expected this response. 24 hours, Mr. Halpern. Then we'll need access to the facility with or without your cooperation. After the agents departed, Luna was quiet for a long time, staring at the rocket that concealed her father's ultimate secret. They're going to take everything, aren't they? She said finally. Maybe. Probably. Ray felt exhausted by possibilities he couldn't fully grasp. Luna, you should distance yourself from this. You have a future in aerospace engineering, and getting involved in whatever this becomes could ruin that. Luna's response surprised him with its intensity. Mr. Halpern, do you know why I want to study space exploration? Ray shook his head. My little brother died of leukemia when I was 12. The doctors said that the kind of research that might have saved him requires microgravity environments, experiments that can only be conducted in space. Luna's voice was steady but passionate. Your father's technology could make space research affordable and routine. It could save lives, advance human knowledge, open up possibilities we can't even imagine yet. Or it could be turned into the most devastating weapon ever created, only if we let that happen. Luna met his eyes with the fearless determination of someone who'd already lost the thing she most wanted to protect. Your father chose to hide this technology rather than let it be misused. But maybe there's a third option. Making sure it's used for the right purposes. Ray's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Deadline moved up. Bank wants payment by tonight, or they foreclose tomorrow morning. The impossible pressure of immediate financial crisis versus long-term moral responsibility made Ray feel like he was being torn in half. Every minute he spent wrestling with cosmic questions about humanity's future was a minute closer to losing the auto shop, his family's income, and any chance of providing Jake with college opportunities. I have to go, he told Luna. My wife is waiting, Mr. Halpern, Luna said as he reached the door. Whatever you decide about the government, promise me you won't just hand over your father's work without understanding what it means. Some discoveries are too important to be left to people who only see the immediate applications. The drive back to Tonopah gave Ray time to think, but thinking only made everything more complicated. His father's journal entry had revealed a man, torn between scientific ambition and ethical responsibility, someone who'd ultimately chosen isolation over compromise. But Edmund Halpern hadn't had a struggling family depending on him for basic survival. At the motel, Sarah was waiting with an expression Ray recognized, the look of someone who'd reached the end of her patience with uncertainty. "The bank manager called," she said. "They'll accept $35,000 tonight to stop the foreclosure. Ray, we have to make a decision." Jake looked up from his laptop. "Dad, I've been researching those government bonds we found. They're legitimate, and they're worth exactly what they appear to be worth. We could cash enough to save the shop and still have millions left over." "It's not about the money," Ray said, though even as he spoke he realized how hollow that sounded to a family facing homelessness. Sarah stood up, and Ray could see years of accumulated frustration in her posture. "Then what is it about, Ray? Your father's been dead for a week. Whatever secrets he was protecting, they didn't protect him from dying alone in the desert. He was protecting the world from technology that could be weaponized. And what about protecting his family from poverty? What about protecting his son from growing up feeling abandoned?" Sarah's voice carried the weight of decades of carefully controlled resentment. "Your father made his choices, Ray. Now you have to make yours." The truth hit Ray like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just talking about the immediate financial crisis. She was talking about a pattern that had defined their marriage. Ray's tendency to chase abstract possibilities while neglecting concrete responsibilities. "Give me until morning," Ray said. "One more day to figure out the right thing to do." Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "One day, Ray. But tomorrow night, either we cash those bonds and save our life together, or I'm taking Jake back to Phoenix and filing for divorce." The ultimatum hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Ray realized that his father's final gift might cost him everything that mattered, not because the technology was dangerous, but because the burden of protecting it was something Ray wasn't strong enough to carry while still being the husband and father his family needed. That night, Ray lay awake, staring at the desert stars through the motel window, wondering if he was about to repeat his father's mistake of choosing abstract principles over the people who loved him. Ray arrived at the facility before dawn, hoping to find clarity in the desert silence. Instead, he found Jake sitting beside the largest rocket, drinking coffee from a thermos and staring at the gradually lightening sky. "Couldn't sleep either?" his son asked. Ray sat beside him on the concrete pad, accepting the offered coffee cup. For several minutes, they watched the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and red. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Jake said finally, "about Grandpa choosing the world over his family. I didn't mean, yeah, you did, and you were right." Jake's voice carried a maturity that reminded Ray uncomfortably of himself at 25, already carrying too much responsibility. "But I've been wondering if maybe he thought he was choosing his family too, protecting us from the consequences of what he'd created." Ray considered this. His father's journal had been filled with anguish about the potential military applications of his work, weapons that could level cities, propulsion systems that could deliver devastating payloads anywhere on Earth within hours. "Maybe," Ray said, "but it doesn't change the fact that he left me feeling like I was never good enough, never smart enough to understand what was really important." "Dad," Jake's voice was gentle but firm, "you know that's not true anymore, right? You've spent the last 3 days understanding technology that most people couldn't even comprehend. Grandpa left this for you because he knew you could handle it." Before Ray could respond, Luna arrived on her bicycle, pedaling hard across the desert floor with her backpack bouncing. She skidded to a stop beside them, breathless and excited. "Mr. Halpern, I've been working on the propulsion calculations all night. I think I understand what your father really accomplished." She pulled out her tablet showing complex mathematical models and energy calculations that made Ray's head spin. "It's not just advanced propulsion," she said. "It's clean energy generation. The same principles that create thrust can be used to generate electricity with almost no environmental impact. Your father didn't just invent a better rocket engine, he solved the energy crisis." Ray felt the weight of implications settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. Revolutionary space travel, clean energy, and weapons of unprecedented destruction, all contained in the prototype hidden inside the rocket behind them. "Luna, there's something you need to know," Ray said. "The government agents are coming back today. They want everything my father left behind." Luna's expression hardened with surprising determination. "Then we need to make sure they don't get it, at least not all of it." "What do you mean? Your father was smart enough to hide the complete plans. Maybe he was smart enough to hide backup copies too." Luna gestured toward the smaller rockets scattered around the facility. "We should check every one of them." Jake stood up, energized by the possibility of action. "She's right, Dad. If there are multiple copies, we'd have leverage. Options." Ray's phone rang before he could respond. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Ray, there's a problem. Someone broke into our house last night. They didn't take anything valuable, but they went through all your father's papers, your office, everything related to the inheritance." Ray felt ice in his veins. "Are you safe?" "I'm at the hospital. I came in early for my shift and found out about the break-in from our neighbor." "Ray, this isn't random. Someone is looking for something specific." After hanging up, Ray shared the news with Jake and Luna. The implications were clear. Whatever game they thought they were playing had escalated beyond their control. "We need to move fast," Luna said. "If they're searching your house, they're getting desperate." The next 2 hours were a frantic treasure hunt through the facility. Luna's intuition proved correct. Edmund Halpern had been meticulous in creating redundancies. They found encrypted hard drives hidden in the guidance systems of 3 different rockets, backup documentation sealed in waterproof containers buried beneath launch platforms, and most importantly, a second prototype component concealed in the workshop's ventilation system. But the most significant discovery came when Jake, exploring the facility's communication equipment, found an active connection to a secure server. "Dad, Grandpa was still uploading data until the week before he died," Jake said, staring at the computer terminal. "He's been maintaining remote backups of everything." Luna leaned over his shoulder, reading the file directories. "Not just maintaining them. He's been sharing them. Look at these access logs. Someone else has been reviewing his research." Ray studied the screen, recognizing some of the technical terminology, but not the implications. "Who?" Luna's fingers flew over the keyboard, tracing digital pathways that led to an astonishing revelation. Universities, international space agencies, research institutions in 12 different countries. Your father has been carefully distributing his research to people who would use it for peaceful purposes. He was creating a safety net, Ray realized. If the US government tried to weaponize his work, other scientists would already have access to the peaceful applications. Jake pulled up another directory. "Look at this. He's been in contact with someone at the International Space Station. They've been planning test missions using his propulsion technology." The picture that emerged was of a man who hadn't simply hidden dangerous technology, but had spent 2 decades carefully orchestrating its release to people committed to using it for humanity's benefit. Edmund Halpern hadn't been a hermit. He'd been the conductor of a global scientific conspiracy dedicated to peaceful space exploration. Luna's voice was filled with awe. Your father was playing a longer game than anyone realized. He wasn't just protecting the technology, he was ensuring it would eventually be used correctly. Ray felt something shift in his understanding of his father's choices. Edmund hadn't abandoned his family out of selfishness or obsession. He'd sacrificed his personal relationships to serve as the guardian of humanity's future in space. The question now, Jake said, is what we do with what we've learned. Before anyone could enter, they heard vehicles approaching again, but this time the sound was different, heavier, more numerous, and accompanied by the distinctive whine of helicopter rotors. Through the hangar windows, they could see a convoy of military vehicles surrounding the facility, while 2 helicopters circled overhead. Agent Coleman's 24-hour deadline had apparently been optimistic. "They're not taking chances this time," Luna observed with surprising calm. Ray made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "Luna, Jake, there's a service tunnel that leads from the workshop to the main road. Take the backup prototype. And the encrypted drives, get them to someone who can continue my father's work." "What about you?" Jake asked. "I'm going to buy you time, and I'm going to make sure Agent Coleman understands exactly what she's trying to confiscate." Luna gripped his arm. "Mr. Halpern, be careful. Some people see revolutionary technology and only think about power and control. And some people," Ray replied, thinking of his father's decades of careful planning, "spend their entire lives making sure that doesn't happen." As Jake and Luna disappeared into the service tunnel with the most critical components of Edmund Halpern's legacy, Ray walked toward the hangar entrance to face whatever came next. For the first time in his life, he felt worthy of being Dr. Edmund, Halpern's son, not because he understood the science, but because he understood the responsibility. The encrypted hard drive in Luna's backpack contained more than revolutionary propulsion technology. It contained his father's true gift, the proof that some discoveries are too important to be controlled by any single government or corporation, and that the future of human space exploration belonged to all humanity, not just those with the power to weaponize dreams. Ray emerged from the hangar with his hands visible, walking slowly toward the military perimeter that had transformed his father's facility into something resembling a war zone. Agent Coleman stood beside a command vehicle, speaking into a radio. With the clipped efficiency of someone coordinating a major operation. "Mr. Halpern," she called as he approached. "I hope you've reconsidered our conversation." "I have," Ray said. "But first, there's something you need to hear." He pulled the audio recording device from his jacket pocket, the final component of his father's legacy that Luna had discovered hidden in the main rocket's guidance system. Edmund Halpern's voice, recorded just weeks before his death, had been waiting for exactly this moment. Coleman gestured to her team to maintain their positions, but approached Ray with wary curiosity. "What is it?" Ray activated the device, and his father's familiar voice filled the desert air with crystalline clarity. "If you're hearing this recording, then the government has finally found my facility, and my son has inherited a burden I spent 23 years trying to resolve. Agent Coleman, and yes, I know it will be you, Patricia, the time has come for complete honesty about Project Icarus and why I chose exile over collaboration." Coleman's professional composure cracked visibly. "How did he? I've been monitoring government communications for 2 decades, Patricia. I know about the task force you've been leading, the search protocols, the classified briefings where my name appears on lists of national security threats. But more importantly, I know about the weapons applications your department has been developing based on the incomplete research you recovered when I disappeared." Ray watched Coleman's face carefully as his father's voice continued, each word precisely chosen to maximum impact. "What you don't know is that the technology you've been trying to weaponize is fundamentally incomplete, deliberately so. The propulsion system requires a stabilizing component that I never included in the original research. Without it, any attempt to build weapons based on my work will result in catastrophic failure." The implications hit Ray like a physical blow. His father hadn't just hidden dangerous technology, he'd sabotaged it, ensuring that anyone attempting to weaponize the incomplete plans would face disaster. "But here's what I want you to understand, Patricia. The complete technology, The version that could actually revolutionize space travel and clean energy generation, that exists too. And for the past 20 years, I've been systematically sharing it with international research institutions committed to peaceful applications. Coleman's radio crackled with urgent communications from her team leaders, but she ignored them, focused entirely on the recording. The European Space Agency has been testing my propulsion prototypes for 18 months. The Japanese are incorporating my energy generation systems into their next-generation spacecraft. The International Space Station has approved 3 missions, using my technology for purely scientific purposes. What I'm telling you, Agent Coleman, is that you're too late. The peaceful applications are already being developed by people who will never allow them to be weaponized. Ray felt pieces of his father's strategy crystallizing in his mind. Edmund Halpern hadn't been hiding from the government. He'd been orchestrating a careful release of his technology to ensure it could never be controlled by any single nation or military organization. My son Ray is now the legal owner of my research and the custodian of my choices, but he's also something I never was, a man who understands that family comes first, that human relationships matter more than abstract principles. I'm hoping he'll find a way to honor both the technology's potential and the people who love him. The recording paused, and Ray could hear his father's breathing, the weight of 2 decades of isolation audible in the silence. Patricia, you have a choice to make. You can confiscate what's here and spend the next decade trying to reverse engineer incomplete technology while the rest of the world moves forward with the complete systems. Or you can recognize that the future of space exploration belongs to humanity, not to any single government's military ambitions. When the recording ended, the desert silence felt profound. Coleman stood motionless for several seconds, processing revelations that had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape she thought she understood. The incomplete research you mentioned, she said finally, our weapons development program has been building failures for 20 years, Ray confirmed. My father designed it that way. Coleman's radio erupted with urgent chatter as her teams reported findings from their facility search. But Ray could see in her expression that the tactical situation had become secondary to larger implications she was still calculating. Mr. Halpern, you understand that this doesn't change the classified nature of your father's work. The national security implications have been resolved by making the technology available to everyone committed to peaceful use, Ray interrupted. Agent Coleman, my father spent 2 decades planning for this conversation. He knew you'd come eventually, and he wanted you to understand that the game changed long ago. Ray pulled out his phone and showed Coleman a message that had arrived an hour earlier, a communication from Dr. Sarah Chen at the International Space Station, confirming that Luna had successfully transmitted the complete propulsion system specifications to the research consortium his father had been secretly supporting. The technology is already in the hands of people who will use it to advance human space exploration, not to build weapons, Ray said. The question now is whether the United States wants to be part of that future or wants to keep chasing military applications of incomplete research. Coleman studied the message, her professional training warring with the reality of a situation that had evolved far beyond her operational parameters. Mr. Halpern, what exactly are you proposing? Ray felt his father's wisdom flowing through him, the understanding of how to turn conflict into collaboration. I'm proposing that instead of confiscating my father's work, you help me establish a research foundation dedicated to peaceful space exploration, a public-private partnership that ensures American participation in the next generation of space technology while maintaining the ethical standards my father died protecting. For the first time since her arrival, Coleman looked genuinely surprised. You're offering to work with us. I'm offering to honor my father's vision while protecting my family's future. The technology exists, Agent Coleman. It's going to transform space exploration, whether the US government participates or not. The question is whether America wants to lead that transformation or watch it happen from the sidelines. Coleman activated her radio, speaking in codes that Ray didn't understand, but that clearly indicated a fundamental shift in operational status. Around the facility, he could see her teams receiving new instructions, weapons being lowered, the military posture relaxing into something more, resembling a diplomatic mission. "Mr. Halpern," Coleman said, "I'm going to need to make some calls to Washington. This conversation has exceeded my authority to negotiate." "Take all the time you need," Ray replied, "but understand that my father's technology is already changing the world. The only question is whether we're going to be part of that change or victims of it." As Coleman walked away to coordinate with her superiors, Ray felt his phone vibrate with a text from Sarah. "Bank accepted, partial payment. Shop is safe for now. Coming to Nevada to see what you found?" For the first time in days, Ray smiled. His father's final gift hadn't been money or technology. It had been the demonstration that some problems could only be solved by thinking beyond immediate self-interest to consider humanity's larger needs. The audio recording device lay warm in his palm, containing his father's voice, speaking truths that had taken 23 years of isolation to fully understand. Edmund Halpern had chosen exile not out of selfishness, but out of love. Love for his family, love for humanity, and love for the dream of peaceful space exploration. Now it was Ray's turn to choose, but unlike his father, he wouldn't have to choose alone. Sarah arrived in Nevada with Jake as the sun was setting, driving Ray's old pickup truck loaded with legal documents, financial statements, and a determination that radiated from her like heat. She'd brought reinforcements too: Harold Brennan, Edmund's attorney, and Dr. Maria Santos, a colleague from the hospital who also happened to be a former patent attorney specializing in aerospace technology. Ray met them at the facility's entrance, where Agent Coleman's team had established what looked more like a diplomatic encampment than a military operation. The transformation had been remarkable. Within 6 hours of Ray's revelations, the federal response had shifted from confiscation to negotiation. "This is not what I expected," Sarah said, surveying the mix of government vehicles, scientific equipment, and what appeared to be a mobile command center. "Things got complicated," Ray admitted, "but complicated in a good way, I think." Luna appeared from the workshop, carrying a tablet loaded with technical documentation and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Over the past few hours, she'd been serving as Ray's technical translator, helping him understand the full implications of his father's research while preparing documentation for the negotiations ahead. "Mrs. Halpern," Luna said, "your husband's father was a genius, not just scientifically but strategically. He spent 20 years orchestrating the most sophisticated technology transfer in history." Dr. Santos, a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, studied the facility with professional interest. "Mr. Halpern, I've reviewed the preliminary technical documents your attorney sent me. If these specifications are accurate, we're looking at technology that could revolutionize multiple industries." "Not could," Harold Brennan corrected, pulling out a thick folder of international communications. "Already is." Dr. Halpern, apparently, maintained correspondence with research institutions worldwide. The peaceful applications of his technology are already being developed on 3 continents. Agent Coleman approached their group with the measured walk of someone who'd spent the afternoon in heated conversations with her superiors. "Mr. Halpern, I've been authorized to discuss a formal partnership agreement. Washington is very interested in your proposal for a research foundation." Sarah stepped forward with the instinctive protectiveness of someone who'd watched her family struggle for years. "Agent Coleman, before we discuss partnerships, I want to understand exactly what my husband is being asked to commit to." Coleman's respect for Sarah was immediately apparent. "Mrs. Halpern, Your husband has inherited research that could advance space exploration by decades while providing clean energy solutions for Earth. But he's also inherited the responsibility of ensuring that technology isn't weaponized. And the government's position is evolving, Coleman admitted. 6 hours ago, we were here to confiscate classified materials. Now we're discussing how to ensure American leadership in peaceful space technology while honoring your husband's father's ethical constraints. Jake had been quietly documenting everything with his phone, approaching the situation with the systematic attention to detail he'd inherited from both parents. Agent Coleman, what kind of partnership are we discussing? Legal structure, funding, oversight? Coleman pulled out a tablet displaying organizational charts and financial projections that suggested her afternoon had been very productive. A hybrid public-private foundation, jointly funded by government contracts and private investment. Your father would serve as technical director, with oversight from an international board of scientists committed to peaceful applications. Dr. Santos leaned forward with interest. International oversight? That's unusual for government partnerships. These are unusual circumstances, Coleman replied. Dr. Halpern's research is already international in scope. We can either participate in that reality or be excluded from it. Ray studied the preliminary agreements Coleman presented, seeing legal frameworks that balanced his family's financial security with protection of his father's ethical principles. But the complexity was overwhelming. Patent rights, technology, licenses, international treaties, and oversight mechanisms that would require lawyers and scientists to interpret. This is a lot to process, he said, and there's still the immediate issue of our financial situation back home. Sarah touched his arm. Ray, Harold handled that this afternoon. We used some of the government bonds to satisfy the bank loan. The auto shop is safe. Ray felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. How much did we use? $50,000, Harold said. From assets worth approximately $47 million, your immediate financial concerns are now manageable. Luna's tablet chimed with an incoming message that made her gasp with excitement. Mr. Halpern, this is from Dr. Chen at the International Space Station. They've successfully tested a small-scale version of your father's propulsion system. It works exactly as his calculations predicted. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Edmund Halpern's technology was already operating in space, proving its viability for peaceful exploration, while demonstrating that the technical transfer his father had orchestrated was irreversible. Coleman's radio crackled with urgent communications from Washington. After a brief conversation in technical jargon, she turned back to the group with an expression that mixed frustration and admiration. Apparently, 3 other governments have just announced their intention to incorporate Dr. Halpern's technology into their space programs. The cat, as they say, is entirely out of the bag. Ray felt a strange mix of pride and apprehension. His father's careful orchestration of global technology sharing had succeeded beyond anything Edmund could have imagined. But the success brought new pressures and responsibilities. What happens now? Sarah asked. Coleman consulted her tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be rapidly evolving directives from multiple government agencies. Now we move forward with the understanding that this technology will be developed with or without American participation. The question is whether we lead that development or follow it. Dr. Santos had been quietly reviewing legal documents on her own tablet. Mr. Halpern, the foundation structure Agent Coleman is proposing would provide substantial financial resources for your family while ensuring the technology is developed responsibly. But it would also mean public scrutiny and ongoing government involvement in your lives. Ray looked at Sarah, seeing in her eyes the same careful consideration she brought to major medical decisions at the hospital. She was weighing risks and benefits with the practiced skill of someone accustomed to life and death choices. There's another option. Luna said quietly. We could decline the government partnership and work directly with the international research consortium your father established. Several universities have offered to fund the foundation privately. Jake pulled up financial projections on his phone. The private route would give us more control but less security. Government partnership means steady funding but political oversight. Ray found himself thinking about his father's decades of careful planning, the way Edmund had anticipated this exact moment and prepared multiple pathways forward. But his father had worked alone, while Ray had something Edmund had sacrificed: family support and collaborative relationships. I want to call a family meeting, Ray said. Just us. Before we commit to anything, I want to make sure we're all comfortable with whatever path we choose. Coleman nodded approvingly. Smart approach. These decisions will affect multiple generations. Take the time you need. As the government team settled in for what appeared to be an extended negotiation process, Ray gathered his family in the workshop where everything had started. The rocket prototype still gleamed in the center of the room, but it no longer looked like an impossible burden. Instead, it looked like possibility. Dad, Jake said, I've been thinking about what Grandpa wrote in that letter. About choosing between family and duty. What about it? I think he was wrong about having to choose. This foundation idea, it could strengthen our family while honoring his work. We'd be working together instead of apart. Sarah smiled at their son with the pride of a mother, watching her child reach adult understanding. Jake's right. Your father sacrificed his family relationships to protect his technology, but maybe we can protect both. Luna, who'd been quietly organizing technical documents, looked up with sudden inspiration. Mr. Halpern, what if the Foundation's mission statement specifically included family preservation as a core value? Making sure that advancing science never comes at the cost of human relationships? Ray felt pieces clicking together in his mind, not just the technical components of his father's research, but the emotional and ethical framework that would guide its application. Edmund Halpern had spent 23 years protecting humanity's future in space. Now Ray had the chance to protect both that future and the family bonds his father had sacrificed. Outside, Agent Coleman was coordinating with international partners via satellite communications, while government scientists set up equipment to conduct preliminary assessments of the facility. The master key device that would unlock or destroy everything lay hidden in the workshop safe, waiting for Ray's final decision about how his father's legacy would be used. But for the first time since inheriting the rocket facility, Ray felt confident about the path forward. He had what his father had never possessed: the support of people who loved him, and the wisdom that came from balancing personal relationships with larger responsibilities. The climax was approaching, but Ray no longer feared it. Instead, he was ready to honor both his father's sacrifice and his family's future. The final confrontation began at dawn, not with conflict, but with collaboration. Agent Coleman had returned with a full diplomatic team, including representatives from NASA, the Department of Energy, and the National Science Foundation. But she'd also brought something unexpected: Dr. William Chen from the International Space Station, participating via secure video conference from orbit. Ray stood beside the main rocket prototype with his family gathered around him, holding the activation sequence card that represented his father's final safeguard. This small piece of technology could either unlock the complete propulsion system for peaceful development or trigger a destruction sequence that would render all the research permanently inaccessible. Mr. Halpern, Agent Coleman began formally, we're prepared to offer you a partnership agreement that we believe honors both your father's ethical constraints and America's strategic interests in space technology. The terms were more generous than Ray had dared hope. Joint leadership of an international research foundation, guaranteed funding for peaceful applications, and legal protections that would prevent the technology from being weaponized by any participating nation. but the agreement also required Ray to activate the complete propulsion system, demonstrating its capabilities to the international scientific community. Sarah squeezed Ray's hand as he studied the activation card. "Are you ready for this?" "I think so," Ray said, "but first I want to say something to Dr. Chen." The video connection crackled with orbital communication delays as Dr. Chen's face appeared on the mobile screen Agent Coleman had positioned beside. The rocket, the International Space Station commander, was a thoughtful man in his 50s whose expression carried the weight of someone who understood the implications of revolutionary technology. "Dr. Chen," Ray said, "my father spent 20 years sharing his research with your consortium because he believed space exploration should unite humanity rather than divide it. Before I activate this system, I want your assurance that it will never be used for military purposes." Chen's response came with the characteristic delay of space communications. "Mr. Halpern, I can give you more than assurance. I can give you proof. Your father's preliminary systems have already enabled 3 successful missions focused on asteroid mining research, climate monitoring, and deep space observation. The technology is already serving peaceful purposes." Luna stepped forward, with her tablet displaying real-time data streams from the International Space Station. "Mr. Halpern, look at this. The station is currently using a modified version of your father's energy generation system to power their research equipment. It's working perfectly." Ray felt his father's presence in the desert morning air, the sense that Edmund Halpern had orchestrated this moment with the same careful precision he'd brought to his engineering calculations. The activation sequence card felt warm in Ray's palm as he inserted it into the rocket's control system. "This is for you, Dad," he said quietly, then pressed the activation sequence. The prototype came alive with a subtle hum that seemed to resonate through the desert floor. Energy readings spiked on monitoring equipment as the revolutionary propulsion system demonstrated its capabilities, generating thrust without conventional fuel combustion, producing clean energy as a byproduct, and confirming every theoretical projection Edmund Halpern had spent decades perfecting. Agent Coleman's technical team recorded everything with scientific rigor, documenting performance specifications that would form the foundation of the international partnership agreement. But Ray's attention was focused on Jake's expression of wonder and Sarah's smile of pride, his family finally understanding the magnitude of what his father had achieved. "Incredible," Dr. Chen's voice carried across the space-to-Earth connection. "Mr. Halpern, your father's system is performing exactly as our models predicted. This technology will revolutionize human space exploration." Luna was practically bouncing with excitement as she monitored the energy output readings. "Mrs. Halpern, do you understand what this means? Your father-in-law didn't just invent better rockets. He solved the fundamental energy problems that have limited human space travel since the beginning of the space age." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the peaceful demonstration of technology that had cost her husband's father decades of isolation. He really was protecting something precious, wasn't he? "More than precious," Agent Coleman said, reviewing the technical data streaming from the prototype. "Revolutionary. Mr. Halpern, we're prepared to sign the partnership agreement immediately. This technology needs to be developed responsibly, and your family needs to be protected while that happens." Ray looked around at the faces surrounding him. Government officials and scientists who'd traveled from around the world, his wife and son whose support had made everything possible, and Luna, whose passion for space exploration reminded him why his father's work mattered. The activation sequence card had served its purpose, unlocking not just the technology, but the future Edmund Halpern had dreamed of. Peaceful space exploration, guided by ethical principles and international cooperation. Ray felt the burden of his inheritance transforming into something lighter, not the weight of terrible responsibility, but the wings of unprecedented opportunity. "Agent Coleman," Ray said, "let's make history together." The partnership agreement signing took place in the main hangar, with representatives from 12 nations participating via secure video connections. Ray had never imagined himself at the center of international diplomacy, but as he signed his name to documents that would establish the Dr. Edmund Halpern Memorial Space Research Foundation, he felt the profound satisfaction of honoring his father's vision while protecting his family's future. Agent Coleman had become an unexpected ally in the negotiations, using her influence to ensure the agreement protected the technology's peaceful applications while providing substantial financial resources for the Foundation's work. The partnership structure guaranteed American participation in the research while maintaining the international oversight Edmund Halpern had carefully established. With these signatures, Coleman announced to the assembled officials and scientists, "We're committing to the largest cooperative space research initiative in human history. Dr. Halpern's technology will be developed exclusively for peaceful purposes, with all participating nations sharing in both the costs and benefits." Sarah stood beside Ray as he completed the final signatures, her hand resting on his shoulder with the steady support that had sustained him through the most challenging week of their marriage. Jake documented everything with quiet pride, understanding that he was witnessing his father's transformation from failed auto mechanic to director of revolutionary space research. Luna had been accepted into an accelerated aerospace engineering program that would begin immediately at the Foundation's new research facility. Her excitement was infectious as she explained to the international scientists how she'd helped decode Edmund Halpern's research and contributed to understanding the propulsion system's capabilities. The most remarkable aspect of Dr. Halpern's work, Luna told Dr. Chen during their orbital video conference, is how he designed the technology to be inherently peaceful. The same principles that generate thrust also produce clean energy, making it more valuable for exploration than warfare. Dr. Chen's response carried the weight of someone who understood the historical significance of the moment. "Luna, your generation will inherit a solar system opened by this technology. The missions we're planning will establish permanent human presence on Mars, Europa, and Titan within 20 years. Ray felt a profound shift in his understanding of his father's legacy. Edmund Halpern hadn't abandoned his family out of selfishness. He'd protected humanity's future while carefully orchestrating its release to people committed to peaceful applications. The rocket facility in the Nevada desert had never been a hiding place. It had been a launching pad for humanity's expansion into space. The technical demonstrations continued throughout the day, with the prototype propulsion system performing flawlessly under international observation. Energy output exceeded theoretical projections, fuel efficiency surpassed the most optimistic calculations, and environmental impact remained virtually zero. But the most significant moment came when Agent Coleman presented Ray with a classified document that had been declassified specifically for the signing ceremony, Edmund Halpern's original resignation letter from NASA, written 23 years earlier. "To the Director of Advanced Propulsion Research, I'm submitting my immediate resignation from Project Icarus and all related government research. I cannot in good conscience deliver technology with such devastating military potential to any single nation or organization. However, I'm not abandoning the research. I intend to continue development independently, with the goal of ensuring this technology serves humanity's peaceful expansion into space rather than our capacity for destruction on Earth. I understand this decision will be viewed as treason by some and cowardice by others. I accept that judgment while believing that some discoveries are too important to be controlled by the politics of any single era. The technology will be protected until the world is ready to use it responsibly. That may require decades, but humanity's future in space is worth the wait." Respectfully, Dr. Edmund Halpern Ray read his father's words with emotions too complex to untangle. grief for the relationship they'd never had, pride in Edmund's moral courage, and gratitude for the burden his father had carried alone so that Ray wouldn't have to. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading over Ray's shoulder. He knew this day would come. He planned for you to be here, making these decisions with people who cared about you. Jake looked up from his documentation with sudden understanding. Dad, Grandpa didn't fail as a father. He just had a longer timeline than any of us realized. The afternoon concluded with preliminary mission planning for the Foundation's first projects, asteroid mining operations that would provide rare Earth elements for Earth's clean energy transition, deep space observation platforms that would advance humanity's understanding of the universe, and Mars colonization missions that would establish humanity's first permanent foothold beyond Earth. Luna's passion for the work was evident as she collaborated with international scientists on mission parameters and technical specifications. Ray realized that his father had not only protected revolutionary technology, he'd inspired a new generation of scientists committed to using it responsibly. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the international delegates prepared to return to their respective countries, Agent Coleman approached Ray with a document that represented the completion of his father's long strategy. "Mr. Halpern," she said, "this is the official acknowledgement that Project Icarus has been successfully transferred to international oversight for peaceful development. Your father's 23-year mission is complete." Ray accepted the document with profound gratitude, not just for the technology his father had protected, but for the demonstration that some problems could only be solved through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to principles larger than individual ambition. The partnership agreement would transform not just space exploration, but Ray's understanding of what it meant to be Edmund Halpern's son. 6 months later, Ray stood in the observation deck of the newly constructed Dr. Edmund Halpern Memorial Space Research Foundation headquarters, watching as the facility's first mission launched from the renovated pad where his father's rockets had stood silent for decades. The sleek spacecraft rose into the Nevada sky with the quiet efficiency of his father's revolutionary propulsion system, bound for an asteroid mining operation that would have seemed like science fiction just a year earlier. Sarah joined him at the window, wearing the Foundation's administrative director badge, with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd found purpose beyond her expectations. The transition from hospital nursing to space research administration had challenged her in ways she'd never anticipated, but the work felt meaningful in ways that transcended personal ambition. "The Mars mission team wants to meet with you this afternoon," she said, consulting her tablet with the organized efficiency that had made her invaluable to the Foundation's operations. "Luna's preliminary habitat designs are ready for review." Ray smiled at the mention of Luna, who'd transformed from a teenage space enthusiast into one of the Foundation's most promising young engineers. Her acceptance into the accelerated program had led to innovations that impressed even the most experienced researchers, and her passion for peaceful space exploration embodied everything Edmund Halpern had hoped for in the next generation of scientists. Jake appeared in the doorway with a stack of legal documents that represented the Foundation's expanding partnerships with universities and research institutions worldwide. At 26, he discovered a talent for the complex negotiations required to balance international cooperation with American strategic interests, serving as the Foundation's liaison with government partners while maintaining his grandfather's commitment to peaceful applications. "Dad, the Foundation Charter is ready for your signature," Jake said, presenting the final document that would formally establish the organization's permanent mission and values. Luna helped draft the ethical guidelines section. Ray accepted the Foundation Charter with reverence, reading the mission statement that had emerged from months of international collaboration. The Dr. Edmund Halpern Memorial Space Research Foundation is dedicated to the peaceful exploration of space through revolutionary propulsion technology, committed to advancing human knowledge while preserving family bonds and fostering international cooperation. Our work honors the principle that some discoveries are too important to be controlled by any single nation or organization, and that humanity's future among the stars belongs to all people, regardless of their country of origin. The charter felt heavy in Ray's hands, not with burden, but with the weight of dreams finally given form. His father's technology was already transforming space exploration, with missions launching monthly to destinations that had previously required years of planning and enormous resources. Luna burst through the door with her characteristic enthusiasm, carrying a tablet, displaying real-time data from the asteroid mining mission they'd just watched launch. At 19, she'd become the Foundation's youngest department head, leading habitat design for the Mars colonization project, while completing her advanced degrees through the partnership program. "Mr. Halpern, the propulsion system is performing perfectly," she announced. "Fuel efficiency is actually exceeding our projections by 12%. At this rate, we'll reach the asteroid field 3 days ahead of schedule." Ray felt his father's presence in Luna's excitement, the continuation of Edmund Halpern's passion for pushing human boundaries while maintaining ethical principles. The Foundation had become more than a research institution. It was a living embodiment of the belief that scientific advancement and human relationships could strengthen each other rather than compete. "There's something else," Luna said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Dr. Chen sent a message from the International Space Station. They want to name the first Mars settlement after your father, New Halpern Colony." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she processed the honor being offered to Edmund's memory. The man who'd lived in exile to protect his principles would be remembered on another planet as someone who'd made human expansion into space possible. Ray walked to his father's desk, where the original research journals lay open beside photographs of the family Edmund had sacrificed his relationship with to protect humanity's future. The irony wasn't lost on Ray. His father had chosen isolation to preserve the possibility of human connection across the solar system. The evening brought a quiet celebration at the facility, with Foundation staff and their families gathering to commemorate the successful launch and the charter signing. Ray found himself surrounded by people whose lives had been transformed by his father's legacy. Scientists pursuing dreams they'd never thought possible, engineers working on technologies that would reshape human civilization, and families who understood that some work was too important to be left to government bureaucrats or corporate executives. Agent Coleman, who'd become a trusted advisor to the Foundation, raised a glass of champagne in toast. To Dr. Edmund Halpern, who proved that sometimes the most important battles are fought in solitude, and to his son Ray, who proved that those battles can be won through cooperation. As the celebration continued around him, Ray stepped outside, into the desert night where his journey had begun. The rockets that had once seemed like monuments to his father's abandonment now stood as launch platforms for humanity's greatest adventure. The Nevada sky was brilliant with stars, including the constellation Cassiopeia that had guided him to his father's hidden research. His phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen aboard the International Space Station. "Ray, your father would be proud. The technology he protected is already enabling missions that will establish permanent human presence throughout the solar system. Thank you for ensuring it serves peace instead of war." Ray typed back, "Thank you for helping me understand that some legacies take generations to fulfill." Walking back toward the Foundation headquarters, Ray carried with him the satisfaction of choices well made and responsibilities properly honored. His father's final gift hadn't been money or technology. It had been the demonstration that sacrifice and vision could create possibilities beyond any single lifetime. The Dr. Edmund Halpern Memorial Space Research Foundation would continue its work long after Ray was gone, ensuring that humanity's expansion into space remained guided by the principles of peaceful cooperation and ethical development. Luna and Jake would carry the mission forward, along with countless others inspired by the belief that some dreams are worth protecting across decades. Ray paused at the entrance to read the inscription Luna had designed for the Foundation's main entrance, dedicated to the principle that humanity's greatest achievements come not from individual ambition, but from the courage to put the future above the present and cooperation above competition. Inside, Sarah was reviewing mission plans for the next phase of Mars colonization, while Jake coordinated with international partners on asteroid mining operations. The work would continue, guided by Edmund Halpern's vision, but strengthened by the family bonds he'd sacrificed to make it possible. Ray Halpern had inherited more than rockets and research. He'd inherited the chance to prove that some legacies could honor both the principles that created them and the people who carried them forward.